Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in today's video, I just want to share with you my story about how I personally have learned the fretboard. And when I say learned the fretboard, I'm just talking about what I've learned so far. I'm 30 years into it. I started playing guitar when I was about 11 years old. I'm now 41 years old, so I have 30 years of experience into learning this fretboard. I still have a lot more to learn. The learning never stops. But the purpose of this video is just to share with you how I've learned what I've learned so far. I want to point out key points, throughout my guitar journey of things that significantly have helped me along the way. And then I also want to share with you how I would do things differently. Like if I could go back and tell my 11-year-old self how to do it all over again, what specific path to follow in order to shorten the learning curve. That's also what I'm going to share with you in this video. So the format of this video is going to be a bit different than normal. I'm not going to have a ton of heavy editing in it. I'm not going to have tons of fretboard diagrams and images popping up in the video like I normally do. Reason being is because I've already made videos about every single thing I'm going to talk about here today. As I go through this story, I'm going to be referencing videos that I've made, and if you're watching this from YouTube, I will have links in the description for every single video that I reference. My brain, it just plays music all day, every day. It's been doing this all my life since I was as far back as I can remember. I remember being 5 years old, something like that, and I remember having this toy phone, and you would press buttons on this toy phone, and each button would make a different musical note. And I remember, I would always go to my dad, and I'd be like, "Hey Dad, listen to this song I made up," and I would play him these songs on this toy phone, and my dad was pretty impressed. He was like, "Son, you're a natural musician, like you should pursue music." And I guess I kind of always took that advice. He just kind of recognized it. I'm not claiming to be the best musician in the world. I'm not the best guitar player, the best piano player, anything like that. But I cannot deny the fact that I have a musical brain. It just goes on in my head non-stop, 24/7. I got my first guitar when I was 11 years old. My parents got me a guitar. And I was like, cool, I have a new machine that I can make music with. I have the music going on in my head all the time, 24/7. It doesn't stop. I want to do that with this new machine. Problem is, I got to figure out how to use this thing, The guitar is this big, complicated matrix of notes. A piano, at least if you just stick to the white keys on the piano, very simple. Just noodle around on the white keys, play in the C major scale. It's also the A minor scale, whatever. It's easy. Guitar, I couldn't figure out how to make the same type of beautiful music as easily with it. And that's exactly when I started to embark on my current 30-year journey to try and figure out this fretboard, because I wanted to make music with this thing, but I didn't know how to. Alright, so I got myself this awesome music producing machine. Now I just got to figure out how to play the damn thing, because I want to be able to write my own music, I want to be able to play my own music, but I got to figure this puzzle out first. So the first thing I did was my parents, they signed me up for guitar lessons. And I think I did maybe 4 lessons with this guy, maybe 6 lessons or something. The guy was a pretty nice guy, nice guitar teacher and stuff, but he just kept teaching me songs. And I'm like, all right, I learned a few songs. The first song I ever learned was Plush by Stone Temple Pilots. Then he taught me some other songs. I don't remember what other songs he taught me. I just remember that first one. I remember asking him, like, "Hey, man, can you, teach me how to play the guitar? I don't really want to learn songs so much, Like, how to actually play the guitar." He's like, "Yeah, we'll get to that. Here, learn this song." And then he'd give me another song to learn. So after about 6 weeks of that, I was like, this is not what I want to do. I want to learn how to play this guitar. So instead of signing up for another guitar teacher, I figured, all right, let me just try and take a different approach. So the very first thing I did was I went and I learned how to play every single Nirvana song start to finish. It's not like Nirvana songs are super hard to play. It's mostly just power chords and stuff like that. But, I was 12 years old, something like that, 13 years old. This was in the early 90s. I was a big Nirvana fan back then. And, I don't know, just like, I don't really want to learn how to play other people's songs. I want to write my own music, but I figure if I can learn how to play every single Nirvana song start to finish and be able to do that, play along with the album, I'm at least moving in the right direction as far as understanding how the fretboard works. And it definitely did help me out, because once I learned power chords and once I learned how to move these power chords around, it's the same shape. It's just movable. You can kind of play the same shape on different frets. I was like, all right, cool. every single Nirvana song is done using that simple concept. So I can then take that concept and I can make up my own stuff. I can get the music out of my head and I can play it in power chord form. So that was the first step. So shortly after that, I then stepped it up and I decided to learn every single Metallica song. I was a huge Metallica fan back then too. I never actually achieved this goal. I did learn a bunch of Metallica songs, but I never learned every single one of them. I learned a few solos. I learned the Master of Puppets solo. I could eventually play that whole song all the way through. I could play Sanitarium all the way through. I could play Fade to Black all the way through. I could play a bunch of songs off of the Black album, off the Injustice for All album. I learned a ton of Metallica stuff. And this was right about the time when I first got onto the internet. My dad got the internet, I think I was 14 years old. And I remember I was like, whoa, tabs, guitar tabs, this is amazing. I was obsessed with guitar tabs. I was like, I could learn any song I want. I could learn anything I possibly want. Tabs, tabs, tabs. I had a binder like this big, just of tabs printed out. It was absolutely insane. For me, I was just like, this is the greatest thing ever, you know? So that helped me out with learning these Metallica songs too. I don't think I would have been able to learn them by ear. I definitely wouldn't have been able to learn them by ear. I didn't know anything about music or music theory. But this was all just, you know, learning all the Nirvana songs, learning a bunch of Metallica songs. This was a means to my own personal goal. You know, I didn't just want to do it just to learn the Metallica songs. I wanted to learn the fretboard. So those were the first two things I did. Learn every single Nirvana song I could possibly play, and then learn a bunch of Metallica songs and solos. Alright, so at about age 15 or 16, I could play every single Nirvana song, and I could play a bunch of Metallica songs and solos. I could then take that information, and then I could use it for my own specific goal, which is to be able to just sit down at the guitar and play my own music. I could play power chords. I could move the power chords around, root the power chords on either the low E string, on the A string, or on the D string, and I could play a bunch of power chord-based songs. I could then add in little Metallica-esque, you know, melodic stuff by using the shapes that I learned from the Metallica songs and solos, you know, like the little minor triad shapes and the major triad shapes that are rooted on the low E string and on the A string. You know, it was cool. I had a little toolbox of stuff that I could work from, but I really didn't understand the fretboard at all. You know, I was just kind of just taking bits of pieces of Metallica stuff and Nirvana stuff and trying to incorporate that into my own playing. I really didn't understand the fretboard. So I figured, all right, you know, I got to learn music theory. That's obviously what I have to do, right? So I did a little searching online for a good music theory book recommendation, and I came across this book. I don't remember the exact title of it, but it was something like The Foundations of Harmony, or The Fundamentals of Musical Harmony, or something like that. I ordered this online. I was super, super excited to get this book. It came in the mail. The book was like this fat. I opened it up, and what did I see? It was just a bunch of exercises that, you know, was done on a musical staff. There was nothing guitar related about this at all. There was no tabs, nothing that I was familiar with. But I was like, well, I got the book. I might as well work my way through it. So I just started working through these exercises, you know, start on exercise 1, read the text, do exercise 2, read the text. So this book was a pretty good music theory book, and I definitely learned a lot of music theory at a very young age from this book. I learned basics such as how to harmonize a scale, how to derive the chords from a scale. Like, you write out the notes of a scale, and then you determine what chords will directly harmonize with that scale by starting on a note, and then you take every other note until you have 3. That's how you derive your triads of the scale. Or you start on a note and then take every other note until you have 4 notes. That's how you derive the 7th chords of the scale. I did a video on that one a long time ago. It's called Understanding Diatonic Chord Progressions. Check that out if you want to learn more about that specific thing. You know, so I learned that type of basic stuff. I learned the basics of how to read music on a staff. I learned basics of intervals, what a perfect 5th was, what a perfect 4th was, you know, what a minor 3rd was, what a major 3rd was. I learned, you know, basics like that. But then I got back to my guitar. I'm like, how the hell do I apply this to this fretboard? You know, like, this is not teaching me what I need to learn on the fretboard. So I learned a bunch of these general music theory concepts, but then when I got to my guitar, I was like, okay, how do I take that stuff and play this on the guitar? Like, how do I put that together? But when I was 16 years old, I started to realize that there's 2 different things. There's general music theory, which is the stuff that I was learning in that book, which is the stuff that applies to all instruments across the board. And then there's guitar theory. guitar theory. There's these shapes and there's these patterns on the fretboard. Guitar theory is stuff like the 5 pentatonic positions, the cage system, the 3-note per string patterns, stuff like that. So that stuff wasn't taught to me in this book. So I was like, all right, I learned some general music theory. I understand these general music theory concepts. I'm not looking in the right place. So after coming to this realization that general music theory was not exactly the same thing as this guitar theory stuff that I was trying to learn, what did I do? I turned to the internet. And you guys are going to think this is funny because I literally I joke on this all the time. But the thing that really kind of unlocked it for me, I'm not going to say it unlocked everything for me, but it unlocked a huge piece of the puzzle for me. Someone said, learn your modes, bro. I was like 15 or 16. I was like, all right, I'll learn my modes, bro. So I went onto the internet, and I don't even think Google was really that big at that time. I think Yahoo was the big search engine at the time. So I went into Yahoo, and I was like, learn your modes, bro. Whatever. I just typed in guitar modes or something like that. And there was just website after website after website after website that was coming up, and every single website basically said the same thing. They were like, all right, pattern number 1, this is the Ionian mode pattern. Pattern number 2, this is the Dorian mode pattern. Pattern number 3 is the Phrygian mode pattern. Pattern 4 is Lydian, pattern 5 is Mixolydian, pattern 6 is Aeolian, pattern 7 is Locrian. If you put all these patterns together, it's like 7 different puzzle pieces of the fretboard all interlocking with one another. I was like, wait a minute. So I could start out in the Ionian mode pattern, and then I could jump up to the Dorian mode pattern, and it's still going to sound good because those 2 patterns connect together like a puzzle. And then I could jump up even further and play in the Phrygian mode pattern. And I was like, wait a minute. So this whole I was like, that's it. Modes. I learned my modes, bro. That was the answer. Modes was the answer to everything. That's all I ever needed. So I spent about 2 years of my life learning my modes. Every day, every night, every afternoon. I would run up the first pattern. I would run up the second pattern, run up and down. I'd run up the third pattern, over and over and over. I drilled the 7 patterns into my head for just years. I was so excited about this, and I had this one guitar playing buddy. Me and him would always hang out and jam together and stuff like that. I was like, dude, do you know about modes? He was like, yeah, I heard a little bit about modes. I don't think I know too much about them. I was like, bro, you got to learn your modes. You got to learn your modes. You got to learn your modes. And I explained it to him. I showed them to him. I was like, look, puzzle pieces, they go together. I was like, well, this is what we've been trying to figure it out for all these years. And he's like, I showed it to him. He's like, bro, modes, that was the answer. Like, his mind was blown too. So both me and him were sitting here like, wow, modes is the answer. We unlocked the guitar fretboard puzzle. This is the most amazing thing in the entire world. I didn't see that guy for a couple of years. He ended up going off to school. He actually went to learn music theory in school. So during this period while he was away at school, he was off learning music theory in the traditional way, taking actual college courses on music theory. I was still learning via the internet and stuff like that. I started to learn that there was something about these modes that wasn't quite what I was under the impression that I thought I knew. I used to go on this one guitar forum all the time. It was called Jam Session. And I would always hang out in the music theory section of the forum because, I'm just a music theory nerd. I've always been all my life. So I spent most of my time just reading music theory posts. At the very top of this music theory section of this forum, there was a sticky post. I don't know if you guys remember forums. I don't even know if they're really a thing anymore on the internet, but on a forum you have a sticky post. That means it's right up there at the top. And this post it probably was up to about 5,000 pages. The post topic was, what are modes? And I was reading through this. I was reading, and I was learning. I was like, okay, so maybe modes aren't what I thought they were. I learned these 7 different patterns. I thought I learned my modes. But all these people are saying, there's all this controversy. Like, people are saying, no, that's not modes. Modes are something else. So I'm like, all right, learning my modes helped me to unlock a huge piece of the puzzle, but maybe I don't actually know my modes, So since we're talking about this right now, this is time to reference you to another video. So I've done tons of videos on modes, lots of them, but if I had to pick 2 of them, I want you to watch 2 specific videos. This is why you don't understand modes part 1. This is why you don't understand modes part 2. That is my best explanation of what modes actually are. A lot of people learn them as patterns on the fretboard, like when someone on the internet says, hey, learn your modes, bro, and then the bro goes and learns his modes the way I did as 7 different interlocking patterns. That unlocks a big piece of the fretboard puzzle. That's great, that's awesome, but that's not actually what modes are. Modes, they have their place. You can produce some cool sounds with them, but it's more of an advanced application. You know, understanding modes is not that complicated in theory, but how to actually apply modes to your playing, it's a bit more advanced. What I learned and I thought were modes, it's just the diatonic scale broken down into 7 different patterns. You could equivalently call these the 7 3-note per string patterns. You could call them pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can call them pattern A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You can call them pattern red, green, yellow, blue. You can label these patterns in any way you want. It's just that people have arbitrarily been labeling these patterns using mode names. So they call it Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. Those are the names that they have assigned to these 7 diatonic scale patterns. That's not actually what modes is all about. So definitely check out those videos. This is why you don't understand modes part 1 and 2. I have lots of other videos on modes too if you want to watch all of them. Knock yourself out. But I've also disproved this many times, because you can take these 7 patterns which just form the diatonic scale. Like if you're in the key of C major, for example, and you play the C major scale on the piano, it's just all the white notes. That's all the C major scale is on the piano. If you want to play in the key of C major on the guitar, you can do so by putting these 7 patterns together, and that's going to give you the C major scale across the entire neck of the guitar. But you could also break that C major scale down into 5 patterns if you want. That's fine. You could also break that big giant, mess of notes. You could break it down into 3 patterns too, and that'll still cover the entire fretboard as well. And that's actually my preferred way. There's the 7 pattern way of breaking this down, which people commonly call modes. There's the 5 pattern way of breaking the fretboard puzzle down. People commonly confuse that with the cage system. I'll get into that in a little bit in this video. But you can also break it down into just 3 patterns. Not a lot of people talk about the 3 pattern way though. I ended up discovering the 3 pattern method on my own. You don't see much about the 3 pattern method. I don't really see people talking about it ever. I just kind of discovered it on my own. I just realized I use these 3 patterns. It allows me to cover the entire fretboard, playing the diatonic scale across the entire fretboard. I'm not going to say I made it up. I'm sure someone else has discovered it before me. I can guarantee that, but I learned it on my own. I didn't learn it from anyone else. Why not? Because no one is confusing the 3 pattern method with anything. Everyone is online saying, learn your modes, bro, learn your modes, bro. And then bro goes and learns his modes and thinks that those 7 patterns are the modes. And they're like, oh, I know my modes. Cool. And then that person tells the next person, learn your modes, bro, learn your modes, bro. So everyone's confusing the 7 pattern method with modes. And then everyone else is, confusing the 5 pattern method with the cage system. They're like, oh, you got to learn your cage system. Learn cage. Yeah, man, cool. I got these 5 patterns. They connect together. Cool. I understand the cage system. Yeah, cage system. Blah, 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 But they're not really learning the cage system. They're just learning how to break the diatonic scale down into 5 patterns. So everyone's like confusing the 7 patterns method with modes. Everyone's confusing the 5 patterns method with the cage system. There's nothing to confuse the 3 patterns method with. And that's why it really doesn't get talked about a lot. There's nothing to confuse it with, there's no incorrect thing to be like, oh, learn your incorrect thing that is accidentally going to teach you the diatonic scale across the entire fretboard. You just don't hear anyone talk about it. So for more about the 7 pattern versus 5 pattern versus 3 pattern breakdown, I did a video. It's called Patterns on the Fretboard. Check that one out. If I had to do things over, I would start with the 3 patterns approach. And then I would suggest learning all of them eventually, but to get to where you're trying to be the fastest, in my opinion, if you want to cover the fretboard, do so with the least amount of patterns as possible. So I would start out by learning the 3 patterns approach first. All right, so let's now talk about the pentatonic scale. So the pentatonic scale, a lot of people, they think of it as a completely different scale other than what we've been doing so far. What I've been talking about so far is the diatonic scale. The diatonic scale is the full key scale. That's the full 7-note scale. If you know the patterns on the fretboard that connect together, whether you choose to do so using 7 patterns that connect together, or whether you choose to do so using 5 patterns that connect together, or whether you do so using 3 patterns that connect together, no matter which way you choose to do it, that is the 7-note diatonic scale. That allows you to play in any key. That giant pattern, which we call the diatonic scale, that shifts up and down the fretboard depending on what key you're in, but it always maintains the exact same shape. It doesn't matter which key you're in. If you're in the key of, say, A minor, all your patterns connect together like that. If you want to play in the key of B minor, all of the patterns shift up by 2 frets, but the patterns remain the same. The relationship between the patterns remains the same. All of the shapes maintain the exact same shape, regardless of what key you're in on the guitar. So that is the diatonic scale. That's called the diatonic scale. So when it comes to the pentatonic scale, all you're doing is you're eliminating 2 of those notes. So I don't care how many patterns you use, 3, 5, or 7 to connect the fretboard together. At the end of the day, you've connected all those puzzle pieces together. You're still just left with 7 notes. That's what the diatonic scale is. It's 7 notes. So if you want to play the pentatonic scale, you take away 2 of those notes and you're left with 5 of the 7 total notes. That's all the pentatonic scale is. So I understood this. I understood what I was trying to do. I was like, okay, I can play the diatonic scale, but the pentatonic scale sounds cool. You know, if I limit myself to just playing the pentatonic notes and I omit those 2 extra notes, it has like a pentatonic-esque sound, a rock type of sound. It's a specific type of sound that you get when you confine yourself to only using those 5 notes. So knowing that information, I knew what I needed to do. I knew that I needed to learn how to take that diatonic scale, and I needed to determine the 2 notes that were going to be dropped. It didn't matter if I was using the 7 pattern method or the 5 pattern method or the 3 pattern method to cover the fretboard using the diatonic scale. Whichever method I used, I just had to figure out how to drop those 2 notes from whichever patterns I was using, because that would allow me to play the pentatonic scale. So in this case, this is really where the 5 pattern method shines, because I'm sure you've heard of the 5 pentatonic positions. The 5 pentatonic positions is just pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 3, pattern 4, pattern 5. If you just play pentatonic position 1 and just play the pentatonic scale, then you're playing the pentatonic scale. If you add in those 2 missing notes to that pattern, well, now you're playing the diatonic scale. You're in pentatonic position 1, but you're playing the full diatonic scale if you go ahead and you add those 2 notes to it. You will find that you can cover the entire fretboard using the pentatonic scale in just 4 patterns. You can take the home box, that's that first pentatonic box, that one that we all know and love, 1 4 1 3 1 3 1 4 1 4, that pentatonic position number 1. I don't care if it's a major key context or a minor key context. The arbitrary label that I'm going to assign to that is going to be pentatonic position number 1 always. So you can take pentatonic position number 1, and then you can take the neighboring pentatonic position in this direction, and then the neighboring pentatonic position in that direction. All of that stuff can be moved up past the 12th fret to the next octave, and then you just fill in the missing part of the fretboard with pentatonic position 4. So you can cover the entire fretboard using just 4 pentatonic positions. You can't do it in any less when you're sticking to just the pentatonic scale. You can get it down to 3 patterns if you're using the diatonic scale, but if you're using just the pentatonic scale, 4 is the minimum amount of patterns that you can do it in. So if I had to do things over again, I would learn the diatonic scale via 3 patterns, and then I would learn the pentatonic scale via 4 patterns. That's the minimum amount of patterns that it requires you to learn to cover the entire fretboard. And you're going to find that there's some overlap too. You're going to find that one of the 3 patterns in the 3 pattern method of the diatonic scale, one of those 3 patterns is pentatonic position number 1, the one I refer to as the home box. Another one of those 3 patterns of the diatonic scale is pentatonic position number 4, which I refer to as the A string home box. And then that third pattern that completes the fretboard right there, that's there's 2 pentatonic positions there, So you're going to see some overlap in there because everything on the guitar has kind of like an overlap. It's all just kind of like, there's this pattern and it connects to this pattern and then it connects to this pattern. It's all like interlocking puzzle pieces. But you're going to see the overlap. But that's how I would do it. I would do, the 3 pattern approach to the diatonic scale, 4 pattern approach to the pentatonic scale. I would do that first. If I then wanted to expand my pattern knowledge, I would then move on to the 7 pattern method of learning the diatonic scale. And then I would go ahead and I would learn all 5 pentatonic positions instead of just 4. All right, so far we've just talked about scales. All right, we talked about the diatonic scale, which is the full 7-note key scale. And then we talked about the pentatonic scale, which is 5 of those 7 notes of the diatonic scale. This is just what I refer to as layer 1. Now, I don't see a lot of people talking about this either. They talk about it, but they use different terminology, You'll see people say things like, drop the scales and focus on chords instead. When they're saying that, what they really mean is stop focusing on layer 1 so much and shift your focus to layer 2. In Brian Kelly zombie guitar speak, that's what that means, But I don't see a lot of people like making, like, this point really needs to be driven in. This needs to be, people need to understand this more, and this is one of the things I'm constantly trying to just, guys, you got to understand this 2-layer stuff, So far, everything we've talked about was layer 1, nothing else. We have not talked about chords at all yet. We've only talked about layer 1. When people mistakenly think that they're learning their modes and they learn those 7 patterns, all they're doing is they're just learning layer 1. Or when people mistakenly think that they're learning the cage system, but in reality they just learned how to break down the diatonic scale into 5 patterns, that's just layer 1, The caged system is a layer 2 system. The caged system is about chords. It's about chord shapes. So this was something that took me a while because everyone is so fixated on layer 1 because layer 1 is a giant puzzle. Layer 1, when I first unlocked layer 1 when I was 15 or 16 years old, I had this mind-blowing experience. I thought I learned my modes and I was like, hey, you got to learn your modes, learn your modes. Everyone's all excited because they unlocked layer 1. There's a lot more to it too, but everyone is fixated on layer 1 because that's a huge thing. So everyone on the internet, not everyone, but a lot of people on the internet are thinking that the cage system is about layer 1. They're like, you got to learn the cage system. So I remember I was trying to learn the cage system and it wasn't making sense to me. Like I learned the cage system. I was like, okay, you got your C shape, you got your A shape, you got your G shape. Okay. I'm sitting there trying to figure out, like, okay, well, where do the rest of the notes go? Like, how do I take these notes of this, of like the C shape or something? If I play a chord in the C shape, how do I fill in the rest of the notes? And the problem is the cage system just doesn't give you that information. So I'm sitting here looking for information within this cage system that everyone's recommending. They're like, you got to learn caged, you got to learn caged, you got to learn caged. And I'm like, all right, I got this chord and I'm in the C shape. I got that, but where's the rest of the notes? How do I fill in the gaps? That's because my mind was not focused in the right place. I was still fixated on thinking that caged was a layer 1 system, which is what a lot of the internet will lead you to believe. But in reality, the caged system is a layer 2 system. It is a way of keeping up with the chord changes. This is huge. Now, a lot of people, they're like, all right, when I play this music, when I play guitar, I know my scale patterns. I've learned the scale patterns, learn it via 7 patterns, learn it via 5 patterns, learn it via 3 patterns, whatever you want. I learned my scale patterns. I learned how to connect the puzzle together. I learned layer 1. But everything sounds too scaly, Like I solo over this one chord progression and it's just, everything just doesn't really connect. It's like I'm playing these notes. It sounds okay because I'm playing in the right key, but it's not really connecting with the music, So that's a big problem. People are like, how do I keep up with the chord changes? And then they look to jazz. Not always, but sometimes people will look to jazz. Jazz is all about one scale per chord. You got a chord here, you play this scale. Moves to the next chord, you play this scale over that chord. Next chord, so one scale per chord. So a lot of people are led to believe like, oh wow, if I want to keep up with the chord changes, I have to play a different scale over every chord. But the problem is a lot of these people are like myself. We're not interested in super complex jazz progressions all the time. We just want to play over some basic chord changes that are in a single key, which is most of mainstream music, which is most of rock, most of classic rock, most of metal, most of pop music, most of punk music. It's all just in like one key. So you don't need to play a different scale over each chord. And then this is another place where modes will rear its head again. This is a place where people will be like, this is what modes is for. Okay, I'm trying to keep up with the chord changes. Modes is what I need. Not necessarily. If you're playing key-based music and everything's in just one single simple key like most mainstream music, you don't really need to worry about modes yet. That's really not where the mode direct practical application is for. By the way, since we're talking about this, check out the video that I did on this exact thing. It's called How to Actually Use Modes in Your Playing Using 4 Examples. Check that video out. That'll show you 4 different ways about how you can actually use modes in your playing. This, what I'm talking about right here, where you're trying to keep up with the chord changes for a song that takes place in just one single key, is really not, you really wouldn't use modes. It would be more unnecessary thinking than you would need. Let's say that we have a chord progression. It's like a 4-chord chord progression. The first chord is a C major chord. The second chord is an A minor chord. The third chord is a G major chord. The fourth chord is an F major chord. Super common chord progression. People will think, they're like, okay, well, if I want to keep up with the chord changes in order to get my playing to not sound so scaly anymore, modes must be the answer, That's what all the hype's about. Everyone's all like, modes, modes, modes. It must be for this. It must be. Okay, so if each chord within the key is representative of a mode, there's 7 chords in a key, and then each chord is representative of one of the 7 modes. The C major chord, being the 1 chord of the key of C major, would coincide with Ionian mode. So I would have to play the C Ionian mode over the C major chord. And then when it shifts to the A minor chord, A minor is the 6th chord in the key. 6th chord coincides with Aeolian mode. Okay, so I then have to play the Aeolian mode over the A minor chord. And then over the F major chord, that's the 4 chord in the key of C major. 4 chord coincides with Lydian. So I have to play F Lydian over that chord. And then G is the 5 chord in the key of C major. So the G major chord, 5 chord associates with Mixolydian. Okay, so I have to play the Ionian mode, and then I have to switch to the Aeolian mode, and then I have to switch to the Lydian mode, and then I have to switch to the Mixolydian mode. I have to play those 4 different scales over those 4 chords in order to keep up with the chord changes. Now, that's not wrong. It's not wrong at all. That's exactly right. It's just, that's way too much overthinking. And this is just my opinion. Some people prefer to do this way. People have argued with me about this before, and they're like, I do it that way, and it works for me. If it works for you, great. In my opinion, I just think it's unnecessary, So all you're really doing is you look at those 4 chords as a whole. You see what key they all come from. You recognize they're all from the key of C major. So the only scale that you need to focus on is one single scale. It's the C major scale, because all of the chords are from the key of C major. The chord progression as a whole is in the key of C major. Therefore, the key scale that you would use over the entire chord progression is the C major scale. If you wanted to break this down into patterns on your fretboard, you could break it down into 7 patterns, you could break it down into 5 patterns, or you could break it down into 3 patterns. It doesn't really matter. If you want to go and noodle on the piano and improvise on the piano, you would just be playing white keys. It's just one scale. But in order to keep up with the chord changes, in order to do the thing we're trying to do here, you don't need to worry about switching scales over each chord. You don't need to worry about modes. You just need to worry about which notes in the 7-note scale are going to sound the best over the C major chord. And then which notes of that 7-note scale are going to sound the best over the A minor chord. And then which notes are going to sound the best over the F major, and which notes are going to sound the best over the G major. The cage system does exactly that. That is the intention of the cage system. The cage system allows you to keep up with the chord changes. That's what I refer to as layer 2. So you're in the key of C major. You have your C major scale. That's layer 1. That remains constant, assuming the key doesn't change, assuming you're just soloing over this 4-chord chord progression and that's the entire song. Layer 1 remains constant. But the notes of focus keep changing as the chords do. The C major chord, you have the notes C, E, and G to focus on. It then switches to the A minor chord. You have the notes A, C, and E to focus on. It then switches to the F major chord. You have F, A, and C to focus on. It switches to the G major chord. You have G, B, and D to focus on. So your notes of focus change, but layer 1 remains constant. Layer 2 is constantly changing. The cage system is about layer 2. All right, so now that we've talked about the cage system, now that you are aware that there is a layer 1, which is the scale, and there's a layer 2, which is the chords. Assuming you're playing in one single key, layer 1 remains constant, but layer 2 is constantly changing. As the chords change, so do the notes of focus within the scale. Assuming that you know all that, and assuming that you understand that the caged system is about layer 2 and not about layer 1, this is the point where a lot of people start to think, okay, obviously I have to learn the notes of my fretboard. If I'm ever going to be able to keep up with these chord changes and apply the cage system, I have to know the notes of my fretboard, right? Not necessarily. And when I say know the notes of your fretboard, I'm talking about having instant recall. Being able to point to any fret on any string and without having to think about it for longer than a tenth of a second. You just instantly know that note. That's what I mean by knowing the notes of your fretboard. If you have to think about it for 2 seconds, if you have to be like, okay, that's a G. You don't know that note, all right? People think that in order to apply the cage system or in order to keep up with the chord changes that you have to know the notes of your fretboard. I have found that to not be the case, at least not for the guitar. You see, the whole thing about the guitar, the whole benefit of the guitar from a music theory standpoint is that everything is movable. Remember when I was saying about the scale patterns? If you want to play in the key of, say, I don't know, A minor, you figure out the patterns of the A minor scale across the fretboard. There are these interlocking puzzle pieces and stuff. You connect that puzzle piece all the way across the fretboard. You got it down. You didn't actually learn the notes of your fretboard, you just learned the patterns. Maybe you learned the 3 pattern way, maybe you learned it the 5 pattern way, maybe you learned it the 7 pattern way, whatever. You learned the patterns, now you can play in A minor. But if you want to play in a different key, you want to play in, say, the key of B minor, you take all those patterns that you've already learned, you didn't actually learn the notes, you just learned the patterns. But you take all those patterns that you've already learned and you shift them up by 2 frets. All the patterns remain the same. Everything's still connected in the same puzzle-like manner as it was before, but everything just shifts up 2 frets. It's a different set of notes now. You're in a different key. You're playing within a different 7-note diatonic scale. Now you're in the key of B minor. But you didn't actually have to learn your notes to do that, did you? No, you didn't. Am I saying not to learn your notes? No. The more you know, the better. Learn everything you possibly can. Everything you can possibly learn about music, learn about music. I'm just saying that in order to play in the key of A minor and then shift your playing to the key of B minor and then shift your playing to, say, the key of, I don't know, E minor or something, all the shapes and patterns remain exactly the same. But you do not have to know your notes in order to apply this information. The same is true for layer 2. The same is true for the cage system. You don't have to know your notes in order to keep up with the chord changes. In fact, if you do go ahead and you try to do that, it's gonna take a longer time. So let's say we have that same chord progression again, C major moving to an A minor chord, moving to an F major chord, moving to a G major chord. You have that 4-chord chord progression. Now you could just recognize, if let's say you want to play like in a little area of the fretboard right here, you could just recognize the shape that the C major chord forms. You could recognize the shape that the A minor chord forms. You could recognize the shape that the F major chord and the G major chord forms in that little area of the fretboard, right? So you're just looking at shapes. You're not actually looking at the actual notes that make up the chord. If you do want to look at the actual notes that make up the chord, That's cool too, but you're going to have to know that a C major chord is C, E, and G. An A minor chord is A, C, and E. G major chord is G, B, D, and an F major chord is F, A, C. You're going to have to know all of that information. All right? Or you can just look at it from a guitar theory standpoint and just say, okay, these are the shapes that these chords form in this area. So let's say you want to take that same chord progression. If it's C major, A minor, F major, G major, that would be a 1, 6, 4, 5 progression. All right? So you know how to play a 1, 6, 4, 5 progression in that key. Now let's say you want to shift that to another key. You can do that. You can shift it to another key. You're just going to have to move it to the equivalent position that you were playing in. Let's say that you played that initial 1, 6, 4, 5 chord progression right there in pentatonic position number 1. So let's say you want to take that chord progression and you want to move it to a new key. You want to play a 1, 6, 4, 5 chord progression in the new key. If you think that you're going to have to learn all the notes of your fretboard, and you're also going to have to learn all the notes of each individual chord that make up this new chord progression for this new key, you have a lot of thinking to do. All right? It's not a bad thing, you know. By all means, learn that. It's just going to take you a lot longer. It's going to take so much less time if you're just like, okay, that's a 1, 6, 4, 5 progression in that key played in pentatonic position number 1. Okay, I know how to play a 1, 6, 4, 5 progression in pentatonic position number 1. So if I can do it for that key, now I'm in this new key, which means pentatonic position number 1 has moved up the fretboard a little bit. But all of the same chord shapes are available right in that pentatonic position. I can play a 1, 6, 4, 5 progression in this new key. You don't have to learn your notes. You know, you just recognize the shapes. Once you locate where your pentatonic position number 1 is for the key that you're playing in, and then you know what the 1 chord, the 6 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord are, you know what the shapes are because the shapes are going to be the same and they're going to fit right into that pentatonic position number 1. That's going to be the thing that allows you to play in any key based on shapes. Now, the reason that the shapes are the same, remember the notes are different. If you're in a different key, the notes are going to change. But the reason that the shapes are the same is because of intervals. So, as a guitar player, it's much, much faster to understand how intervals work than it is to I think it's a monumental task trying to memorize all the notes on your fretboard. It's not impossible. I have a few different methods of how to go about doing that. About the way that I did it was that immersion method video. That's how I learned the notes of the fretboard, so I can instantly recall any note at any time. But it's a monumental task to do that. So people get to this cage system and they're like, oh, okay, I got to keep up with the chord changes. Got it. Layer 2, okay, the chords are constantly changing, so the notes of focus within the scale are constantly changing. Okay, got it. Okay, I obviously have to learn my notes. That's going to delay your progress if you do that. If you instead think, okay, I'm focusing on keeping up with the chord changes. I know the cage system is for that. But instead of looking at each individual note that makes up these shapes as an actual note, instead of looking at a C major chord as a C, E, and a G, or an A minor chord as an A, C, E, instead of looking at it like that, look at the chords as numbers. You look at them as intervals. So if I see a C major chord, I'm just like, there's the 1, there's the 3, there's the 5. All right, cool, got it. If I want to take that C major chord played in whatever shape I'm playing it in, and I want to move it up the neck a little bit using the same shape, but now it's a different chord, which consists of different notes, but the shape is the same. The reason the shape is the same is because the intervals are the same. So I play a C major chord in this shape, I know where my 1s, 3s, and 5s are. I move it up the neck a little bit, and now it's a G major chord. It maintains the same shape. I still know where the 1s, 3s, and 5s are. It's still in the same spot. I want to take that same shape and I want to move it up a little bit, and I want to play, say, an A major chord. Different notes, but the 1, 3, and the 5 are still going to be in the same location. I cannot stress the importance of intervals and how much further intervals are going to get you than spending the time of learning the notes of your fretboard. Intervals are going to get you so much further, so much faster than trying to memorize all the notes of your fretboard and then trying to memorize every single note that makes up every single chord and every single note that makes up every single scale. That's a lot to take in. As a piano player, it's going to be a lot more beneficial to you. As a guitar player, it's a lot easier to just be like, okay, everything's the same shape on the guitar. The reason being is because of intervals. I did a video that's all about intervals, so I'm going to post a link to that one too. That's all about everything you need to know about intervals. So check that out. Super, super important. Cannot stress that enough. Learn your intervals before you learn your notes. Just my recommendation. Now, since we're talking about piano, that is another thing that really helped to bring a lot of things together for me. I used to mess around on the piano when I was younger. And, I used to just kind of noodle around, make up songs. I had a friend who played piano. He would teach me some stuff here and there, but I didn't really know the piano. It wasn't until I was about maybe, 20, 25, 27, something like that. I got myself a full 88-key digital piano, and I hired the keyboardist of my band, who is a phenomenal musician, phenomenal keyboard player. I hired him to give me some piano lessons, so I took official piano lessons for a few months. And then after that, I just kind of, just played around with it. That's kind of what I do. I played drums a little bit. I played piano a little bit, Guitar is my main instrument. So I wasn't trying to become Billy Joel or anything. I just really wanted to just get a basic understanding of the piano. But that is one of the biggest things that I've done for myself as far as just kind of having an understanding of the holistic thing of music theory. It's like there's just music theory, there's general music theory, which applies to all instruments. Like a perfect fifth is going to be a perfect fifth regardless of whether you play it on a saxophone or a piano or a guitar or a bass. So there's general music theory concepts, but there's certain music theory concepts that are much more obvious on a piano, and then there's certain music theory concepts that are much more obvious on a guitar. So this whole thing about intervals that I'm talking about on a guitar, the fact that the shapes are the same regardless of what key you're playing in, everything is movable on the guitar, that aspect of the guitar yields the fact that, like, okay, intervals is going to be much more obvious on the guitar. But then on the other hand, you have this whole other side of this whole other perspective, the piano perspective. So playing the piano just opened up this whole other world for me. I had spent years and years and years studying the guitar fretboard, trying to figure out this guitar fretboard, learning from a guitar player's perspective, learning from the perspective of movable shapes and patterns and stuff like that, learning from a very, very heavily shape-based way of visualizing music, and then moving over to piano. And piano is very note-heavy. Like, everything on the piano is about knowing your notes. You need to know what notes make up each scale. You need to know what notes make up each chord. And of course, there's visual references on the piano too, based on the white keys and the black keys. Everything is notes, 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 notes on the piano. And then everything on the guitar is shape, 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 shapes. The theory behind the shapes is the intervals. On the piano, it's just like the notes is the starting point. So, yeah, the piano really, really, really made a lot of things click. I would say my biggest revelation that I had from learning the piano is the concept of chord tone targeting. I could read about it. I could, whatever, like, hear about it, I could hear, like, yeah, you're supposed to pay attention to the chords, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't really get it. It didn't really click until I started to play the piano. Once I started playing the piano, I'm like, oh, I'm playing this 4-chord progression. I'm playing a C major chord, and then I'm playing an A minor chord, and then I'm playing an F major chord, and then I'm playing a G major chord. And as I'm noodling around, there's certain notes that sound better than others. Oh, those notes that sound better than others happen to be the notes of the chord that I'm on in the progression. That stuff is clear as day on the piano. It's just like super, super, super obvious. On the guitar, it's not so obvious. On the guitar, you're dealing with these shapes and all this other stuff. But it's just two totally different perspectives. One is a very, very note-centric instrument, which is the piano, and then one is a very, very shape interval-centric instrument, which is the guitar. So learning the piano, huge. So there's just one more thing I want to touch on in this video, and then I'm going to wrap this up. The 12 key model. This is something, I cannot stress this enough. Feel free to continue thinking in terms of 24 keys if you want. There's major keys, there's minor keys. Major keys follow a different set of rules than minor keys do. Feel free to keep thinking that way, but you will hit a bottleneck in your study of theory. It's inevitable. You're going to hit a bottleneck, because this is where all the arguments about what modes are. There's just so many things that come up, so many unanswered questions with the 24 key model. And I made a very detailed video about this too. I'm going to link you to this one. It's called The Fundamental Misunderstanding in Music Theory. The fundamental misunderstanding in music theory is not due to the fact that some people follow the 24 key model. That doesn't mean that they don't understand music theory. I know plenty of people that have a great understanding of music theory and they follow the 24 key model. My buddy that gave me piano lessons for a few months, he follows the 24 key model. He thinks in that way, and that's fine. I'm just saying that if you go down the rabbit hole of studying music theory, you're going to hit a point where you're like, there's these unanswered questions, and that specific bottleneck is modes. All right? The 12 key model is just purely mathematical. There's a mathematical explanation for every single question you could possibly think of pertaining to Western music theory. Western music theory consists of 12 notes, 12 equally spaced notes. It's called equal temperament. Under this 12-note Western music system that we follow, every single question has a perfect mathematical explanation to it under the 12 key model. Under the 24 key model, there's all of these things that are just like, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, what's up with that? You know, I can't get into it in this video without wasting too much time, but check out the Fundamental Misunderstanding in Music Theory video that I'm going to link you to if you want to really dive into that one. That's about a 35-minute video that I did. So to summarize, 5 things. Number 1, I would first learn the Diatonic Scale via 3 patterns. I would then learn the Pentatonic Scale via 4 patterns. I would look to see how the Pentatonic Scale and the Diatonic Scale are related, with the Pentatonic Scale just being 5 of the 7 total notes of the Diatonic Scale. I would really focus a lot of time on that aspect of the guitar, and then I would understand that that's layer 1. All right? I would then go ahead and I would learn the caged system, understanding fully that the cage system is about the chords and not about the scale stuff. It's not about the Pentatonic Scale, it's not about the Diatonic Scale. The cage system is about chords. It's about keeping up with the chord changes. It gives you a way to play any chord anywhere in the entire neck of the guitar. It's about chords, 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 chords. It's layer 2. It can be used for rhythm guitar. It can be used for lead guitar from a soloing perspective, but it's about the chords. It's layer 2. I would then focus on intervals, which if you watch my caged video, my 45-minute super comprehensive caged video, it's all about intervals. That's how I teach the cage system. You look at these shapes, but you look at them as their interval breakdown, you know. So focus heavily on intervals. Learn the scale stuff via intervals too, you know. Don't worry about the actual notes. Just look at these as intervals, like you have a scale pattern, which is the 1, which is the 2, which is the 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, as opposed to actual notes. Intervals, intervals, intervals. And then 5th, make sure that this is all coming from the place of 12 key perspective. All right? Understand that there are 12 keys, each of which has 7 chords, each of which can potentially act as the tonal center of the key. That's how I would recommend doing it. If I had to teach myself all of that stuff, if I had to go back and talk to my 11-year-old self and give that particular path of learning, I feel that I probably could have learned all this stuff in a couple of years. But hey, doing things the way that I've done, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world. I've had a lot of fun. I've read a lot of books. I've taken various music classes. I've jammed with many, many different guitar players. I made a living as a musician playing cover music for over 15 years. I've learned thousands of songs. You know, my journey as a guitar player, I've just learned so much, but in so many different sporadic ways, so many different sources and stuff like that. I can't complain, you know. I have just a very deep understanding of all this stuff. But yeah, if I had to do it all over again, that would be the 5 things I would do, and that's what I would tell my 11-year-old self. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. See you next time.